Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include a discussion on whether Twitch is killing single-player games, the World Health Organization classifying gaming disorder as a mental health condition, a programmer rebuilding Diablo 1, and more. As always, discussion timestamps are in the video description. As we dive in here, make sure to ring the sub notification bell to be alerted of new Saturday episodes. For our first bit of news, we'll quickly mention that the Steam Summer Sale is currently on. That's about it. Prepare to get a whole lot more poor. Our next story is about Cyberpunk 2077. As reported by Spiel Times, during a chat session on Cyberpunk 2077's official Discord server, CD Projekt Red's associate design director, Kyle Rowley, spoke about the game's loading screens. By which I mean to say, there will be no loading screens. You know, apart from the original load-in, as you're traveling through the world, there will not be loading screens separating out areas. Now, while that is great news, this isn't as uncommon as it was in the past. Now, for me, the real question is whether they're going to be hiding loading screens behind mechanics like an elevator ride or a very long door opening sequence, which we've tended to see in recent years. Those games that you thought had no loading screens, yeah, you wonder why it takes so long to push that door open? It's loading the next area. Next, a quick story via Tom's Hardware about loot boxes, a topic we've been covering since about November 2017. To get you briefly caught up, the Dutch Gaming Authority is cracking down on loot boxes. Depending on exactly how they're handled, they can be considered gambling. And the authority has now started approaching developers with ultimatums. And the first one turned out to be Valve, specifically about CSGO and Dota 2. The Dutch Gaming Authority gave Valve until June 20th this week to remove loot boxes from their games or be fined the equivalent of about $1 million or 10% of the company's global revenue. Now, Valve consulted with its Dutch legal team and found a loophole. The loot boxes only infringe on the Dutch rules if in-game items are transferable. So as a temporary measure, Valve has simply disabled Steam trading and marketplace transfer for CSGO and Dota 2 for Dutch Steam users. However, they're working on a more convenient solution for their Dutch customers in the long run. Next, I'd like to call your attention to an interesting article that I read on IGN. Yeah, I know. It's authored by Alana Pierce, who spoke to a ton of developers and got the impression from them that they believe that Twitch is killing single-player games. Well, more specifically, it's that Twitch and YouTube and the content creators therein are heavily influencing what games devs choose to make, and they're being steered away from single-player games. The argument is that Twitch and YouTube are just huge marketing platforms. When you got a bunch of people streaming your game, that's free advertising. So developers are being more and more incentivized to go for that free advertising and make games that are well tailored to Twitch and YouTube Let's Plays. So when you have a single player game with a finite amount of content, that'll get less coverage than a game with never-ending content, be it through multiplayer replayability or simply by having an open world game with no real end. A streamer can stream a game like Diablo for years, but a story-driven single-player game that's only 4 hours long, and that doesn't offer a new experience in replaying it, well, it's likely only going to be played once on stream. It can be an excellent game, but it's going to get less hours of advertisement on Twitch. Now, we've seen single-player games like God of War do exceptionally well on Twitch, on YouTube, but we have to know that these have big brands behind them, be it the actual brand name of the franchise or something like Sony or PlayStation pushing it. But even with these big explosions, they tend to be temporary, quite temporary. Once someone has watched a full playthrough of a single-player game, they're unlikely to watch a second. I know there are exceptions, but you have to say that they are exceptions. Now compare that to a multiplayer game, that's a new experience every time. And then even in multiplayer games, though, we're seeing a lot of content churn. We live in a day and age where people need and expect new content in their games multiple times a year to keep playing, to keep interest. That's part of Fortnite's success. The content churn, they're always introducing something new every month. And so the streams and the YouTube content are going to keep promoting this new content, keep people watching, engaged, and playing. Then the other aspect, the entire other argument, isn't on the developer side, but on the consumer side. People who watch an entire playthrough of a story-driven single-player game may no longer feel the need to buy the game. One indie dev pointed to the millions of views that Let's Plays of his game got on YouTube versus the much smaller number of sales that the game had, about 50,000. Now, I suppose you can argue that in some cases it's not an either-or thing. It's not that, oh, if I hadn't watched this game, I would have played it instead. It could have been, if I hadn't watched this game, I would have watched Netflix instead. Playing a game and watching something are two very different forms of entertainment. You can't say if someone isn't spending their time doing one that they would automatically be doing the other. However, I think when it comes to a very story-driven, narrative-driven experience, part of the reason why someone may play that kind of a game is just for the story. And if you get that story already in watching it, then while some people will want to experience the gameplay themselves, others may simply feel satisfied at having experienced it secondhand, because they still got to experience the story. But I turn the question to you folks. What are your thoughts on this? Are you less likely to buy a game if you've seen a full playthrough? Sound off in the comments. Alright, on to our story about the World Health Organization classifying gaming disorder as a mental health condition. Now, I think we first spoke about this back in late 2017. This is, I believe, when they were just considering doing this. Now they have officially classified it as such. I think we all had a nice discussion about our thoughts on that. Well, now that it's actually happened, let's make a couple things clear here. First off, this is not demonizing video games. It is not demonizing gamers or gamer culture. It's not even saying that it's bad to play a lot of video games. It's speaking about a very specific condition akin to a gambling addiction. And in a CNN article, Dr. Vladimir Pozniak, a member of WHO's Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, gives more details. Basically, there are three major diagnostic features or characteristics of gaming disorder that must be met for a diagnosis. One is, quote, that the gaming behavior takes precedence over other activities to the extent that other activities are taken to the periphery. In other words, gaming is the number one thing and only thing in your life. The second criteria is, quote, impaired control of these behaviors. Even when negative consequences occur, this behavior continues or escalates. So if you realize that because you're spending all your time gaming and you're failing all your courses, you're getting fired from your job, your marriage is falling apart, and you don't stop, once you realize the negative effects, you can't stop and you just keep going and even dive further into it. That's the criteria we're talking about here. And the third is that the condition leads to significant distress and impairment in personal, family, social, educational, or occupational functioning. It could also include disturbed sleep patterns, diet problems, and physical health problems. And for a diagnosis to be made, the negative pattern of behavior must last at least 12 months. And he further emphasized that this is a clinical condition. No armchair diagnosing. You need a full, proper mental health professional to give a diagnosis. He added, quote, millions of gamers around the world, even when it comes to intense gaming, would never qualify as people suffering from gaming disorder. He said that the overall prevalence of the condition is, quote, very low. So I think understanding all this helps a lot of us who had an initial negative reaction to this understand better what the WHO is trying to do here. But here's the thing, even amongst professionals, there isn't unanimous agreement. Licensed psychologist Anthony Bean is one of those who disagrees. He says, quote, it's a little bit premature to label this as a diagnosis. He's observed a lot of people who seem to be addicted to video games, and he believes that they are more using gaming as, quote, a coping mechanism for either anxiety or depression. He added, quote, when anxiety and depression is dealt with, the gaming goes down significantly. In other words, the gaming addiction is just a symptom and the actual problem is anxiety or depression or some other mental health condition. And so by now putting the focus on this gaming disorder, you might be driving the focus away from the real problem. Bean believes that the diagnosis is not, quote, appropriately informed. He believes that most clinicians, and in fact the mental health field as a whole, just don't understand gamers. What he recommends is better understanding gaming culture and gamers, and then using that knowledge to help gamers with their anxiety and depression. Learn about what kind of genres these players like, what they gravitate to. Help make recommendations, steering them maybe away from certain games and towards other games. In my non-professional experience and opinion, I've seen people use games as coping mechanisms in a positive way to deal with anxiety and depression, and I've also seen people exacerbate their anxiety and depression through gaming, depending on what games they play. But I turn the question to you folks. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's too early to label this as a disorder? Sound off in the comments. Next up, we finally got some news on World of Warcraft Classic. It looks like the devs have finally decided on a patch version. It'll be patch 1.12, Drums of War. I believe this was at or around the Naxxramas patch. And this is basically the same server that a lot of the vanilla WoW private servers ran. Patch 1.12 was the final patch released for vanilla WoW before the Burning Crusade. Onto some Path of Exile news. Bex, the community director, tweeted the following: "I think this might be the happiest I've ever seen the Path of Exile community, and it honestly warms my heart. I'm so proud of my team, they worked so hard, and I'm elated to see the positive response to their efforts." It seems like GGG really nailed this league. The league mechanic is fun, it can be played from early game to end game, it has replay value, and it came with a patch that brought a bunch of improvements overall. I haven't had time to play Path of Exile since the night the league launched, I played a bit then, but I do look forward to diving more into Incursion. Onto some Diablo news. We're now a week into the new season, Season 14, the Season of Greed. Double goblins. If you're looking for a video on the best areas to farm goblins, check out my video that I just released yesterday. I've also got a bunch of guides on the best builds for Season 14. On the front of Diablo 4 job postings, we've got a new position that appeared, Lead Technical Artist. And then lastly for Diablo news, I want to talk about Project Devolution. This project is the result of about 1,200 hours of work by Galaxy Hacks, and he basically reverse engineered the code of Diablo 1. Now, the whole thing is a bit complicated to understand and explain, but I'll do my best. This is, in a sense, a Diablo 1 mod. You need to have Diablo 1 to run this. It uses all the game's assets, all the sprites, all the art from Diablo 1, but runs on custom code. So the modder basically reverse engineered the Diablo 1 code to replicate it as best as he can. So in a sense, it's a mod that basically changes nothing, which may lead you to ask, what's the point? Well, the point is, by effectively remaking Diablo 1, he's able to fix the bugs that still remained in Diablo 1. He's able to make it compatible, or more compatible with modern systems, with Windows 10. Plus, he's now built a platform that could make it easier to further mod Diablo 1. But overall, it's just really cool to see that someone was able to reverse engineer the code of the game. It's like building a replica of the engine of a 1970 Corvette with no technical specifications, only based on driving the car. I mean, it's not really like that, but kinda. And that's gonna wrap up this week's video, but make sure you've checked out last week's video where we give our wrap up on E3 2018. If you have an idea for a story you'd like to see me cover in a future video, you can post that on the subreddit. Thanks for watching, special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can pledge on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.